My name's Tiffany McKenzie, and I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer with Berardi Immigration Law. Last week, the Canadian border reopened to discretionary or non-essential travel to U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents residing in the United States. As we mentioned last week in our step-by-step guide on how to use the ArriveCAN app, we would be back once the app was updated to show you how to use it if you fall into this category. So we're here today with our updated app in order to show you the step-by-step on my phone how to fill out the app in order to come into Canada. So we're going to show you how to do that and go from there. So as you'll see on here, it says to complete your ArriveCAN form. Now, as we talked about in our previous video, make sure that you've created an account so that this is pretty seamless and pretty easygoing and straightforward. So we're going to hit continue. And now we have the option of air, land, or marine. Now that the hotel quarantine is no longer in effect in Canada, we could hit any of these three options, but to make this pretty straightforward, we're going to stick with entering by land. So for port of entry, we're going to select Peace Bridge or Fort Erie Bridge, and the date of arrival has to be within the next 72 hours. So I've selected this weekend just to make it interesting. The next question is your travel related to any of the following travel purposes? Now, for some people who are traveling frequently, this is where these options really come into effect. So if you hold, a work permit, you're having to cross all the time in order for work, that's where these answers really come in. But for these purposes, we're going to select no, but definitely if you think that you fall into one of these categories, let us know because there's a little bit different of a process to follow for that. So what is the purpose of your travel? So this is where things are a little bit different from the last video. So the first option is returning to Canada, so Canadian citizen, permanent resident. The second option, which is the important one for us, is discretionary optional travel by fully vaccinated U.S. citizen, U.S. permanent resident, or resident of St. Pierre and Miquelon. I've probably butchered that. So this is available for the fully vaccinated U.S. citizens. So again, if you're fully vaccinated, this is definitely an option that you can take advantage of because now you're able to enter Canada for discretionary or non-essential travel. The third option is family reunification. The fourth option is foreign worker. Then we have study, international student. Then we have study for a U.S.-Canada cross-border student. We then have compassionate grounds, or we have none of the above. For some of these, they're fairly straightforward, but some of them, like compassionate grounds, again, reach out to us for further clarification. So we're going to click the next button. And there's my information. Now we're doing this as a US citizen. So we're going to click next. And you'll put in your passport. There'll be a picture. It'll allow you to take a photo so that all the information uploads properly. For primary phone number, we're going to put in your phone number. And then, have you received a COVID-19 vaccine? So, when it comes to the vaccines, this is where it's really critical, especially if you're entering from the United States, in terms of the timing and in terms of the vaccine. So as a reminder, you have to be fully vaccinated. So that's 2 doses or you've had the 1 shot of Johnson & Johnson. However, it has to be more than 2 weeks since you received the second dose. So if you're still within that area where, maybe you had the second dose 10 days ago, this is not an option for you yet because you are technically not fully vaccinated in the eyes of the Canada Border Services Agency. So in a case like that, you may have to quarantine, or honestly, I would probably delay the trip until you are at that point where you've had both shots and it's been more than 14 days. So definitely keep an eye on the dates, especially if you've just had the vaccine recently. So on the screen, have you received a vaccine? We're going to click yes. And this is where you're then going to type in all of the information. So for myself, I received Pfizer. I received it in Canada. And then we're going to put in just a random date. And then have you received a second dose? And again, this is where in order to enter Canada for for discretionary non-essential purposes, you have to have had both. We're going to click yes. This is where you would upload both the proof of vaccine for both both doses. So once you've uploaded the proof of vaccine, the next question is going to ask requirements for travel, which is where it's going to ask you about the testing. So if for individual 5 years of age or older, they are required to provide proof of a molecular COVID-19 test. It must be conducted within 72 hours prior to arrival. So it's not going to ask you to upload the test on the app, but we're going to click I understand. And it's going to ask, have you or any traveler listed in the submission tested positive for COVID-19 on a sample collected between 14 and 180 days before your arrival at a port of entry to Canada? So we're going to click no. And then, do you have proof of a negative molecular COVID-19 test on a sample taken no more than 72 hours prior to arrival at a land border crossing into Canada? So we're going to click yes. And then, which country did you receive your negative molecular COVID-19 test from? So as we're doing this as a United States citizen, we're going to click United States. In the last 14 days, did you or anyone traveling with you visit any other countries beside the US? So we're going to hit no. And now it's going to ask about our quarantine plan questionnaire. So we're going to click there. So this, again, you shouldn't be asked to quarantine, but ultimately when it comes to decisions at the border, things are ultimately at the discretion of the Canada Border Services agency officer. But in a case like this, if you're staying in a hotel, you're staying with a relative, you can definitely put down that address. But again, if you have questions, reach out to us. I can see where this might be a little bit trickier for people who are doing day trips to Canada. But, at the end of the day, definitely try your best to make sure that your answers are truthful. So do you have accommodation where you can quarantine for 14 days or possibly longer? I'm going to click yes. Next question, can you avoid all contact with other people in the household with whom you did not travel and have no guests? Yes, I can do that. Will I have access to the necessities of life, including water, food, medication, and heat without leaving quarantine? Because again, if you're asked to quarantine, this means that you have to remain on your property during this time. So there's, you're not able to go to the grocery store, the drugstore, anything like that. So we're going to click yes. And then the next question is, are there at-risk people at the location where you plan to quarantine? So, they do define it, as you'll see on the split screen here. So, people who are 65 years or older, have underlying medical conditions or a compromised immune system. If you do, then that's not really going to work in terms of quarantine plan. But for myself, it's that's not an issue here. So we're going to click no. And then, is there a person at the location where you plan to quarantine who works or assists in a facility, home, or workplace that includes at-risk populations? So if you have somebody in the home who works in a hospital, a senior's home, something like that, that's also not going to work in terms of the quarantine. But in my case, that's not the case. So I'm going to click no. And then the last question is your place of quarantine a group living environment, example, a group home or senior residence, or does it currently house different families? And again, as you'll see on the split screen, it defines all of that. So, a shelter, a student residence, a small apartment you share with others, a shared household with large family, or shared living spaces with housemates who haven't traveled with you that you cannot avoid interacting with. Again, if you hit yes, that wouldn't be an acceptable quarantine plan. But in terms of the video, I'm going to click no, because that's the case. And then the next question is going to ask about your quarantine location. So what is the full address of the place you and the travelers listed in the submission plan to quarantine? So in my case, I'm going to put staying with friends or family. Again, I'm doing this as a US citizen. I am a Canadian citizen, but I don't want to completely confuse the app. So you would then put in your address, powered by Google, and click next. And then the last step, because again, this is a very involved app, is complete this COVID-19 self-assessment. So we're going to click the next button. And this is going to ask if I have any symptoms, like a fever and cough or a fever and difficulty breathing. So we're going to click no. And now it's going to say, thank you for filling out your travel information. I acknowledge that the information provided in my form is true to the best of my knowledge. Now, I'm not going to click submit because obviously I've done this as a US citizen, so that's not quite the case. But if I were to hit I submit, then it's going to spit out a confirmation code. It's also going to send you an email with that confirmation code. But another tip that I might suggest is doing a screen capture on your phone so that you also have it saved in screenshots or whatever, so that you can definitely pull it up and make it a lot easier. So we're going to close that so that I don't submit it by accident. So again, this is a very thorough step-by-step guide in terms of using the ArriveCAN app in order to seek entry to Canada. As we've done it as though we are a US citizen who is entering Canada. And again, as of this last week, American citizens are allowed to enter Canada for discretionary or non-essential purposes. One thing that we did talk about very quickly there is in terms of the testing. And I just want to really focus and highlight on the testing very quickly, because this is something that we do get a lot of questions about. So in order for the test to work at the Canadian border, it must be a molecular test. So it cannot be a rapid test, just to underscore, cannot be a rapid test. However, it also has to be conducted within 72 hours of arrival to Canada. So it must be a recent molecular test to Canada. Again, just to super underscore, it cannot be a rapid test. So otherwise, I mean, you would bring your test with you, you'd bring the ArriveCAN with you, you'd bring your travel document to Canada, and you should be able to enter Canada for non-essential reasons. Come up here for tourism, as you've seen on some of our videos. So if you guys have any questions, definitely please reach out to us. We are here to help. If there are further updates to the app, we will be here, and we will, we'll upload another video in terms of doing a step-by-step guide. At this point, in terms of people other than US citizens entering Canada, there is a tentative date for early September for that. So we'll probably be back doing another video for then. But until then, thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions, please reach out to the firm and we'd be more than happy to assist you.